All right. I'm sorry, having some technical difficulties here. Okay, our panelists today are Lumbee Tribal Chairman Harvey Godwin, Reverend Mike Cummings, pastor of Deep Branch Baptist Church, Jackie Clark, former Vice Chancellor for Enrollment of UNCP, and Dr. Leslie Locklear, Project Coordinator for First Americans Teachers Program. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to go in between the PowerPoint, and then I'll minimize the PowerPoint so I can show the question, because I want to show the participants' face while they're talking. So the first question that we're going to look at, with Thanksgiving having just passed, I want to talk about food in the Lumbee culture. What's the importance of food in the Lumbee culture, and what's your favorite food? Okay, and that question can be open for any of our participants.
And I'm going to chime in pretty soon. Is now okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, now I'm a vegetable lover. We had some meat growing up. Of course, we grew our meat, but we always had vegetables. But I'm going to tell you what my favorite vegetable is. Anything that you can season with meat grease is my favorite food among the Lumbee people. And that little screen that you had on there, that collared sandwich with
yes.
Yeah, with fat back on top of the cornbread.
Yes.
You've just about hit my favorite one. So I'm going to sign off now and let somebody else jump in on that.
Well, you got to add a cold Pepsi too, Pastor Cummings.
Yeah, well, you're right. Now, didn't have many Pepsis, but I guess Kool-Aid was my childhood beverage.
Yes.
I didn't drink sweet tea. Mama wasn't a sweet tea maker. Of course, now we're talking about 70 years ago, and I got introduced to sweet tea in Sampson County as a young preacher, and found out I had been missing a major segment of joy in life, was drinking sweet tea. But anyway, you're right. You're right.
Okay. Okay. Miss Jackie or Leslie, you want to chime in?
I will. Growing up, I have such fond memories of Mother's sweet potato bread. I have tried making it, just never able to quite get what I remember from childhood, but sweet potato bread.
Yes.
And as an adult, it's got to be chicken and pastry.
Yes.
Chicken and pastry. You know,
and it's got to be yellow. Gotta be yellow.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't grow up eating that because we never had chicken. Daddy did not. He said it was a nasty bird, and we never had chicken. But now that is that's the favorite for my children and my grandchildren. Yellow chicken and pastry.
Yes, there you go. Dr. Locklear?
Sure. And Ms. Travis, I will say, for me, I definitely respect the perspective of Reverend Cummings and Miss Clark. And I think for me, I've not gotten to the age where I can cook any of these delicious things yet. And unfortunately took 2 pies to Thanksgiving that I thought were great, a traditional egg custard and a buttermilk pie, but they were chosen by none of my family, so I'm still working on that. But I will say chicken and pastry is one of my favorites, and I think the work of Dr. Melinda Maynor, and she talks a lot about our food. And something that was brought up by someone from the Kahari community once talked about food as pedagogy, and that meaning that food is a way that we connect, food is a way that we come together. And I think that food holds a very specific place in the Lumbee community, not only for holidays, but thinking about funerals and when people pass in our community, when people have surgery, when we want to support people. So food holds more than just a nutritional value for us. I think it is a staple in our community that brings us together in so many different ways. And I think even coming from the younger generation, we value and understand the value of that food. Even if we can't cook it, we're still working on it.
A work in progress. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. So our next So, question is going to be, what do you think is the importance of teaching non-natives about Native culture?
One thing I think is important, even natives, is particularly maybe natives my age. Some of the pan-native images that you see there. I didn't grow up with the powwow. I didn't grow up with any of the imagery that you see here, and I don't know. I don't know what to attribute that to, but I remember when LRDA started some of these very early events, well, the Lumbee homecoming for one. I remember one of the Hallawasaponi leaders, I guess you would call Arnold Richardson, who was a well-known artist from the Hallawasaponi community, was married to Quay's mother's sister, Aunt Pat. And Arnold came to some of those early Lumbee homecomings, maybe the first or second one. And I remember Arnold saying something that I couldn't respond to. Arnold says, what y'all need to add to your homecoming is a powwow. And the Hallawasaponi people are just tremendous in their powwow celebration. They may have one of the largest ones around. And but that was interesting to me because I didn't know how to powwow. My sons learned to drum and to chant, and actually at School of Science and Math, Joe Lyles, who was the art teacher at Science and Math, formed a drum group. And Joe, of course, had a tremendous interest in Native culture and would just spend weeks, almost a summer, out in the West on some of the reservations. I think Joe might have lived in his pickup truck. But anyway, he was the art teacher at Science and Math, and he brought my boys into the drum. And I'll tell you, it's good for us to teach other people about our culture. For people my age, just getting a grip on it and understanding some of those connections that we just didn't talk much about. It's important for me, at least. It's important for me.
And I would add too that the value of sharing what it means to be Native and the complexity of that, because it's very easy for society and other groups, when they think of someone as being Native American, they think of what you see right there in that slide. And we're just so much more than that. We're that, but we're so much more. And as I traveled overseas and other places with my husband, folks were always amazed that I was American Indian, and it was always tied to some kind of specific look, as well as living in teepees. I think that as we share with others how the beauty actually of our people, and the beauty is much like the beauty of all people, that it helps others to not pigeonhole, and it helps our children to begin, I think, to feel comfortable in their own skin as Indian children, whether they have fair skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, etc. So that's why I think that's sharing about our Native culture and heritage is important to others.
And I'll just add on to that really quickly that research shows that talking to a non-Native audience or a non-minority audience about diverse groups increases their tolerance later in life. So not only are we working to expose you to the diversity that is around you, but also letting you know that in your adult life, this leads to a global understanding and more global respect for that diversity. So even if you are in a situation where you do not interact with the Native population or the African American population or any other diverse population, sharing this information with non-Natives only increases that tolerance and understanding. So for me, that is always my goal, is even if you're not in my community, even if I'm the only Native you will ever meet, I hope that you would then pass this information down so that we can lead to a more tolerant and understanding world. That is my number one goal. And just like Mr. Cummins and Ms. Clark said, when I went off to school at a primarily white institution, I also interacted with people who had a very narrow understanding of what Natives are. So seeking to increase that understanding is really important and something that I also strive for. But I also grow up in that mid-generation where my parents were not familiar with powwows and it was not ingrained in them. But as I was coming up, it was something that we kind of set on a pedestal, like, oh, if you didn't have a regalia, if you did not dance in powwows, then you were not Native enough. But I'm glad that today's panel talks about our religion, our food, and the diversity and complexity that we entail that make us Lumbee. My regalia does not make me Lumbee, and dancing in a powwow does not make me Lumbee. So there are so many different parts of us that I want non-Natives to understand.
Okay, that sounds really great. Thank you, guys. Okay. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, we're going to hold questions until the end that you may want to ask. But I think I see something coming through the chat box. And if you do want to submit a question through the chat box, you're welcome to, but we will answer them at the end. Okay?
Let me just add here, you mentioned Melinda a while ago. I think the first film, that Linda did focus, I think the title of it was Real Indian. And in that little short video film, she kind of approached the issue of our identity and how people see us by displaying herself and her image, how she looked with a girl who looked absolutely Southern white, blonde hair, blue eyes, and really fair skin. And she was an Indian. She was, I don't know her tribe. I don't want to say South. She wasn't Southwest. Maybe she might have been Southwest. And then a Navajo girl who looked like the TV Indian. And so she dealt with the image, just the physical image that we portray, that people see us as. And that was kind of, for me, a good way to project, we've got this matter of our identity all mixed up with what we just look like. And so she dealt with that in that little film. And she might have been in college. She may have done that while she was at Stanford. And just a really perfect title, Real Indian. And I appreciated just being able to experience that. Some of the schools may be using that as well. I'm not sure, but it goes back several years now.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go on to the next question. What is one common stereotype that you'd like to dispel about Lumbee people or Native Americans more generally?
I would just say, actually, it goes back to the discussion that with the previous question, the understanding that we are as complex and different as among the Native American broader community, with other tribes, just like other folks are, and definitely Preacher Mike mentioning the real Indian. That is something that we joke around within family gatherings or gatherings within with folks who are our Indian community, but that's not something that we would necessarily say or I would not, and would probably feel offended if somebody used that term in a mixed group with natives and non-natives, but definitely concerned when folks make these broad strokes of what a real Indian is like, and as if we are all alike. And one point, personal point for my family, my baby brother is very fair, blonde hair, and blue-green eyes, depending on what weather or whatever his eyes change. And I remember the difficulty that he had in developing his own identity, and actually probably the majority of the fights that he got in school were about his color. And of course, I'm real dark, and I remember at a time when I was small that, I had a sister that was real fair, that it was not good to be as dark as I am. So definitely the standard things. I think there are stereotypes that we have within the Lumbee community. There are stereotypes that are tied to the larger tribal communities, Eastern natives versus Western. And then you've got that even broader stereotype typing that's done from non-natives. And it can be skin color, hair texture, definitely having this Southern accent is, when you leave this area, does not even connect with others. So those are some of the things that I think about, that I wish that it would be nice if we, and we just need to continue to educate so that folks will think about that in a broader sense.
Yeah. I agree with you, Miss Jackie. I think education is the key.
I'm waiting for Dr. Leslie to chime in.
I was just gonna say, I think when I went off, so I was born and raised in Hope County, where everybody was largely familiar with Lumbees and American Indians, and I went off to a primarily white institution, like I said, at Chapel Hill, and I was asked a lot of very interesting questions. Do you live in a teepee? Are you all real? Can I touch you? I'll never forget the first time someone asked to touch me or touch my hair. And for me, it was really a complex issue with my identity in trying to represent Indigenous people in a context where we represented less than 1% of the student population, but also understanding that what they saw was something that was completely against their assumptions. So they were assuming that I was going to come to college on a horse with a headdress and live in a teepee. So their assumptions about what I was supposed to be often caught me off guard. And it took me many years to be able to assert my Indigenous identity, because as an 18-year-old, quite honestly, I was just as lost and confused as they were. And they were asking a lot of questions about me that I had not formulated an answer to. But I do agree, Ms. Clark, Ms. Chavis, that education has been the key, and situations like this where we are able to share were very interesting. But I do think those stereotypes of the Western native have been imposed on us for so many years.
Okay, all right. Thank you, guys. Now I'm going on to the next question. For me, growing up, I was a preacher's kid. Okay, I know about going to church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday nights. And Miss Jackie can attest to this. I had to wear dresses all during school. But religion is something that binds us together. Okay, our faith, our church attendance, and love of church and gospel music are also central to Lumbee culture. According to one estimate, Robeson County has some 130 Lumbee churches. The majority of them are Methodists and Baptists. And the church serves as a strong social function in Lumbee culture. We know that. The churches also serve as a training ground for Lumbee politics, educational, and business leaders. So what is the importance of religion to Lumbee people? And you see, Pastor Mike, I got you up over here in the corner.
Yeah, you got me with that abstract. Let me tell you, my sense of Lumbee religion to us as a people is just really central to the fabric of our identity as a people, our religious experience, I believe, as it developed in the late 19th century around the church, around Christianity, for instance. I don't know how long we have been a gospel people affected by the gospel and received the gospel, but I know we began to congregate in a community somewhere in the late 19th century and 1800s. You saw the beginnings and the proliferation of the Indian church. Mm-hmm. And of course, we before we had the Indian church, we were people who went to a church in the community, and that church, as I understand some of that old history in the early 19th century, was that black, white, Indians all went to the same church. Now, there were probably designated areas where you could sit, and you probably, as an Indian or black, had no leadership in that church in your community. But when the Indian churches started developing, I think that was an important thing for us and for Christianity, because we took hold of Christianity as an Indian people, and as Melinda says, we made it sing. Indian people are singers, and when they sing, it's almost like it's a soulful kind of experience. I think Indians generally are spiritual people. Now, when I say spiritual, that doesn't mean specifically Christian, but for us, Lumbee people, we are greatly Christian in our background, in our last 150 years in our history and our background. We're basically Christian people. And our spiritual experience as Christians is soulful. It is emotionally expressed. Now in a modern way, I look at younger churches developing now. Some of the more younger people, and the experience seems to be a little more cerebral. It's not just from the heart as it is the mind. And so it's the experience in church may be now more devoted to the spoken word, and the spoken word needs to be a taught word. Whereas in my boyhood, there was a lot of just deep feeling expressed in our religious experience. But aside from the way that we express religion, the local church turns out to be just a tremendously important aspect of our life in a rural community. It was I see it as the community center of sorts. It was our gathering place. And since there was regularity to it, it kind of put some rhythm into life. And it gave us something to look forward to, living in our rural communities. And all of my earlier years growing up, we were definitely a clannish people, that we did not have much interaction outside of our community. And the church gave us an opportunity to connect with each other in the local communities. And then organizations of churches developed, such as the Burnt Swamp Association or the Methodist Conference or the Church of God Conference. And we got to connect with our people. We were still Indian only. Our churches were Indian only. When you say Indian church now, you have to explain that. But 50, 75, 100 years ago, automatically we understood Indian church. That's because you didn't go anywhere else but to your people's church. And so that gave us, as Indian people and as a community, a place to just socially interact and develop. And somehow, I think there was it encouraged us. We would see some Indian people maybe a little more advanced economically eventually, and we were able to maybe inspire or encourage each other to do better with our lives. But anyway, it was an important part of our community and social development as a community center. Apart from the important influence of the gospel upon us as a people in that spiritual manner. So let me just back out now.
Thank you, Pastor Mike. Would anyone else like to add?
I would just like to add the significance of church from the perspective of when our girls were courting, and someone came, a young man would come to the house. There were two questions, and the first was, "Who's your people?" And the second one was, "And where do you church?" And you needed to be able to answer both those. You could be, somebody from a family that may be perceived as affluent or what, but if you did not church, that always became an issue. And it's interesting with my grandchildren now. I do exactly the same thing, and my girls do the same thing. Who's your people, and where do you church?
Mm-hmm. And I can totally relate to that, Miss Jackie, because that was some of the questions my dad had as well too. You just weren't going to take me out. You had to come in. Who's your people? Where do you go to church? And where do you work? And so that was a big thing in my house as well too. Hey, Tribal Godwin, good to have you. Thank you on mute. There you go.
Sorry, I hadn't used this platform. Plus, I had some.
That's okay.
Sorry, but
that's okay. Would you like to add anything to the question, or you just want to go on to the next one with us?
Well, for the core values for the Lumbee people is number one, belief in God, and then the value of an education, and the protection of our identity and culture, and then our connection to the land. But our Christianity is number one. You got a man sitting right there who I grew up admiring, Reverend Mike Cummins. My wife and him and his brothers went to church together at Bear Swamp, and then I was friends with his brothers, so I knew his family and I knew the Christianity level of their family. But when I was first running for tribal chairman, I went out to churches, and that's one of the things I missed the most about this COVID pandemic is that Sheila and I can't go to the churches and visit with our people of different denominations. There's different denominations in Lumbee. Burnt Swamp Baptist Association is definitely the largest one, I think. But just being able to go to funerals, going to church, going to gatherings that are involved around the church. I miss all of that, and I think that's one of the things that's hurting so much in our community now, is missing church time because of the COVID pandemic. I mean, even a funeral. You know how funerals are. Preacher Mike, I've heard him say this before, and an interview I had with him is that we can't mourn the way we normally mourn with each other. We can't hug each other. We can't fellowship with each other the way we normally do as Lumbee people because of the pandemic. So it's affecting us now as a people. I'll be so glad when we can get beyond this. But I belief in God is just everything to our people. Without it, we wouldn't be where we are now. We wouldn't be as successful as we are. Our success as a people depends on our Christianity, I think.
Yes, that's good.
I want to add to what he said there about belief in God being important to us. I've come to really be convinced that as indigenous people, before the gospel came to us and introduced us to the Son of God in Christ, that we were not a heathen people. Indigenous people aren't necessarily heathen people, and particularly Native people. I think we come from a very rich and profoundly rich heritage of just spiritual connection to realities that were overseeing us, that were providing for us. Somehow the earth that we lived on, we understood as a gift to us from a source. We didn't maybe know his name as we know now, but we absolutely were deeply spiritual people who respected that there was a greater source, a greater authority over us. And, to call the centuries and centuries ago, to refer to indigenous people as heathens is very offensive to me. We weren't Christian, and so were Anglos, anybody else. Christianity sprung out of a group of people of Jews and God that we believe now God was working in and gave us Christ, and that the gospel comes. And I'm so grateful for Europeans coming to America to just bring us insight and more information about who God was in Christ. And I wanted to add about the matter of church in our community. I grew up in church that was very local and very, very community-based. And community-based, back then meant family-based. Rural churches, when you go into old churches now in Indian communities, there was a time when you could have been an outsider walking into that church because you weren't from that community, you weren't related to people in that community, and the church was that community gathering. It was the people of that immediate location. Now we're seeing that our churches are becoming much more regionalized. They're becoming more regionalized and a little bit more impersonal. But the old experience I had as a child growing up, these were the people who could have walked to church, because they were so local and connected geographically in a local way. And it was a tremendous influence on enhancing our lives because we were able to connect family to family in a way that maybe we may be transitioning away from now with the more regionally based churches. Highways and transportation has made it more possible now for people to come from miles around that you really don't even know who come in now. But the burden of a church now is to keep itself small. And what I mean is to keep that sense of community and to keep that sense of family.
Okay.
And Mike, I would add to that, when I first came into office in January of 2016, one of the things that I had promised I would do is that you've been to several of them. We'd bring in preachers and we'd have prayer service here in the tribal chambers. That's never happened before. And we had those on a monthly, then almost a quarterly basis where we would come in, and we would certainly be doing that now, except for the pandemic. But then it evolved from that to where preacher Jimmy Hammonds started working here part-time, but it evolved from that to having prayer service with our tribal employees on Monday and Friday mornings for like 10, 15 minutes, right there in the tribal chambers. And I'll tell you one thing, you could tell a difference in everything, the spirit, everything. And at the same time, during this period, and even now, there was more acceptance to our other part of our culture. We're burning the sage, smudging, having a prayer service around smudging. Even now you see couples get married and they have the smudging and during the ceremony. Our elders at Culture Center, they offer up prayers in their own way 4 seasons of the year. And you see this intertwining now. You used to not even talk about political things in the church, and now that's accepted, where politics is discussed in the church and political beliefs, which kind of, you didn't hear that when I was growing up, but you see that happening here recently. Preacher Mark, I don't know if you disagree with that or not.
You're right. Yeah.
So for time's sake, I'm going to move on to the next question. That was a great discussion. Thank you, guys. When I grew up, therapy was not an option for seeking mental health services, but prayer and going to the altar. And it kind of ties into the previous question. We let the saints pray over us. We would go to church, or we would be anointed with oil. While we acknowledge that religion to Lumbee people is important, we have to also acknowledge that other resources are available that we can tap into. So what are your thoughts about someone seeking services like mental health services or substance abuse services?
I've got some, but y'all go ahead.
I would add that my background is counseling, and and always been in church all my life, but definitely understand just as much as I have diabetes, and then there is a need to go to the doctor for medicine. While I'm going to pray about that disease or that sickness as well, God gives us wisdom that helps us to understand to use the resources that are available to us. So I probably, and I've often thought that I probably went into counseling because I found my daddy intriguing and wanted to understand the complexity of his mind and his story and how it operated. And so definitely mental health is a spirit. It is a spiritual issue. I do believe that core in my heart, but I believe that mental health agencies and professional counseling can be of great benefit to our people.
Well, I know it is too. When I was a young pastor up in Sampson County with the Kahari people, and just a beautiful time of my life, I had a young man who came forward and got saved and joined the church. And about 2 weeks later, I found out he'd been drunk all weekend. And, my background was that someone drunk like that's just an old stinking drunk, and needs to be, needs to just come on back to the Lord and just deal with that with the Lord, and the Lord will take that taste for liquor away from him. Mm-hmm. So that was my background. But someone says, why don't you take him over to Kenansville? Kenansville was over in Duplin County. I lived in Sampson County. And I took this young man, his name was Joe. I took Joe over to a place where he could actually be kept for 2 or 3 days and sober up. But I had the privilege to go inside the office and speak with the counselor, who basically sat Joe and I down, and the counselor informed us that he was an alcoholic, but he was recovering, or he was dealing with it. And this was my first exposure to counseling from someone with a problem that I began to recognize that it was a problem, who basically was saying to a drunk sitting across the table from him, if I would, and he said to Joe, Joe, I'm not any different from you. If I take another drink, then I'm the man you are sitting across from my desk. What I began to learn was that this issue, this matter of addiction is real. It's true. It's real. It's not just the devil. It is a physically controlling matter of our body. And I'd never been exposed to that. I didn't know about that. As a matter of fact, when you talk to some people about drinking and alcoholism, they still are kind of in that mode of thinking, oh, it's just the devil. And if they'd pray, God would take it away from them. And that was my first experience. Then I got acquainted with Dr. Brooks in a different way than what I was. Dr. Brooks is part of our family. But Dr. Brooks taught me immensely about addiction, and really brought me around to understand that this is real, and that there is such a thing as helping people be able to understand it and confront addiction and deal with it in their life, whether it's alcohol or some other kind of illegal drug, that the role of counseling and wise counseling and helpful instruction and teaching, there's a real need, not just a place for it, but there is a need for it. And in a community like ours that's grown up so rigidly conservative in our views toward our faith, and thinking that all of our problems are the devil, it's made it difficult for us to open up and recognize that let's not just put everything on the devil, but see if we can understand that there's something we can do and how we can help each other with some problems we're having. And so counseling now, for me, I've learned that counseling is one of the best things, and any pastor can recognize that there are problems our people deal with that we just don't have simple answers to. And the sooner we can learn the art of referral, the sooner we can learn how to say, there's somebody I wish you would let me get you in touch with. The sooner we pastors can learn how to refer people beyond ourselves, maybe the better we can help some of the folks that we need to be helping in our communities.
That's a good thought. Okay, I'm gonna go on to the next question because it looks like we're running out of time. So with the Lumbee Recognition Act having passed in the House 2 weeks ago, what would full recognition mean for Lumbee people?
Well, we're very close. It's been 5 years of hard work and out of 133 years of hard work. But what it would mean at this point, this became political. And the reason where we are now is because of politics. The Lord allowed for the Lumbee tribe to get into a position where our bills had been worked on and they were introduced. And we ended up having our House bill introduced by Congressman G.K. Butterfield, who's not even from our district because we didn't have one at the time. African-American man to introduce the Lumbee Recognition Act. It passed full House without dissent or without objection, without amendment for the first time in history. It's kind of ironic. But what it really mean is the things you have just finished talking about: health care for our elders, health care for our people. It's unconscionable. It's unbelievable what this could mean for our elders just in health care and medications and all the things you just talked about: mental health, vision, dental, everything would come to our people and wouldn't have to pay for it. I mean, it would prop up the medical facilities that we have here now, institutions that are struggling. They would get paid. They wouldn't have to see patients and not get paid. It would be an economic boost for our region, but an economic health boost for our people. And then education. Can you imagine Ms. Locklear, Ms. Clark, even Preacher Mike, you go through, or your kids go through college or beyond college and don't have student debt, what that would mean? It's a big deal. And I pray that once we have achieved it and we set it up in the right way, because generations from now, we do not want to be like other tribes to where they're just waiting for something free or waiting on a check, and we lose our entrepreneur spirit. We lose the spirit we have as a people who have fought hard and tenaciously for everything that we've achieved as a people. So it has to be enacted and set up right by our people, which will be Lumbee people. It's going to take Lumbee lawyers, Lumbee, everybody on this call, doctors, everybody we got to come together and formulate this thing for the future generations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's a great response. And I know you've done a lot of hard work, Harvey. I got to give you accolades for that. So I did have another question, but I'm going to see if there's any questions that have came from some of our people. Let me see. Our participants. Let's see.
Is that in the chat box?
Yeah, that looks like in the chat box. Someone asked a question about traditional healing practices by the Lumbee.
Well,
yeah,
go ahead, Brother Harvey.
But one of the things I mentioned earlier, I didn't get a chance to talk about this, but some of the Lumbee practice sweat lodges for cleansing and for healing. Talking circles, that's one thing. The tribe itself, tribal government has grants to initiated talking circles where you get people around a fire and they have a mediator and they talk about their problems, especially around addiction. And we have a grant for addiction for substance abuse, not just alcohol, but substance abuse with pills and things like that. We're doing that. And we also had the Elders Fire. The elders go out to the culture center for over 50 years now. They haven't been able to do it during the pandemic. But during the spring equinox, the change of each season, they pray for the well-being of our people. And people, a lot of people don't even know about that. But those prayers been offered up, whether you know about them or not, are healing for our people. And these are just some of the things that we've been doing from the tribe, or the tribal members have been doing.
Okay. I see Barry Dixon. Mr. Dixon, are you on the call still? If so, can you unmute yourself? You said you had some questions. I don't know if he's, let me see if I can unmute him. Let's see. Maybe he's gone.
While we're waiting on him, my favorite food, Lumbee food, is spots and tea cakes my grandmother used to make. Tasha Oxendine she's working with the tribe now full time, and she's about to do a video on making tea cakes. So I'm looking forward to that. Lumbee tea cakes, and also Lumbee flour bread. You remember flour bread?
Yes, the flour bread with molasses.
Yes, ma'am. We brought
and
that
butter.
years ago, and we've had it at powwows and other fish fry, other things we've been doing. And that's really a traditional Lumbee food, is that flour bread, So
yes, it is.
It
is. Yeah. Someone made a comment and said, I really enjoyed learning about life and traditions of the Lumbee. So they like that.
And Ms. Chavis, there's one in our chat. It says, how has enculturation changed the core philosophies of Native Americans? And this was actually a part of my research that I did was focused on the foundational beliefs of some of our younger generation. So I interviewed Lumbee students who were under the age of 26, and it's so interesting to hear Reverend Mike and Chairman Godwin and Ms. Clark talk, because my students that I interviewed shared the same aspects of our culture that were important to them. It was family, it was tradition, it was food, and it was religion. So even though we continue to be enculturated and change and assimilate based on the time, these core philosophies of who we are as Lumbee people, we have stayed true to, and they are still critical parts of my generation and the younger generation's story as Lumbee people. So I always thought that was really interesting as you all were talking. These were things that our students continue to say, these are important to me as a Lumbee. These are things that made my educational experience really important. So we're staying true to those things, even as we change. And Reverend Cummins brought up a very good point about the way the younger generation likes church now. I have a conversation with my mama about a teacher preacher and a preacher preacher, and she loves that preacher preacher, that old school feeling, and I go for that more academic aspect. If I want to learn, I want to dig in, I want to know, I don't want to just leave feeling good. So we always have that conversation about how the different generations and what we value when it comes to church. So I think that we're still staying true to those core philosophies. We just there's different ways to skin a cat, as we can say.
There you go. I see another question. This says, how do you encourage mental health to the Lumbee people, and what specific culture do and don't exist for health providers?
I think if community leaders just buy into the fact that mental health is as important to us as just physical health, and we go to doctors for physical health, and that there are things we struggle with that are psychological, they're mental things, and maybe community leaders are important to buy into that philosophy and just get into get into the business of just recommending people to see this, or somehow just community leaders are tremendously influential in making a difference, I think, in the way the community perceives things.
Okay.
Just a couple of years we had together at the Culture Center, and you were involved with that when we brought people with pain and substance abuse to the Culture Center. We had counselors there, and we had a great gathering. I think over 500 people showed up for that event. But from what I'm hearing from the people I work around, I'm not a professional with this at all, but getting past the shame and then the leadership and embracing it to where we can have people to be open about their pain so they can seek help.
Okay, I see a couple more questions, so we're trying to answer these. Let me see. The first question is, you've already answered that one. Should all North Carolina tribes be fairly recognized by Congress?
I would say yes.
Yes.
All right. If the Lumbee tribes were fortified originally, why was it necessary to know who's your people?
Well, that's always important, I think, to just personally connect, and not just connect, but feel yourself part of, a history, a heritage that begins with your family, but goes broader than that. Family is the building block for everything in the community, and so yeah, I think it's important to connect with to ask that question, who's your people.
We get a lot of calls on that enrollment office here at the Lumbee tribe. The enrollment office, you'd be surprised how many people call and email in any kind of form or fashion, just connecting to people here that's never lived here in their life, but they're trying to connect back. And it's just amazing. There's a lot of people really trying to get that comfort of it belonging to the Lumbee. That's encouraging. And Leslie, what you said about what young people are saying now, that's encouraging as well, because that means that someone in the home is connecting back to our young people and telling them what they've been taught is important to the Lumbee, and holding on to those core values. And there's nobody ever said it any better than Reverend Mike, when he can talk about going back to our communities based around a church and a school, and like you said, the preacher was a teacher or a principal, and they all connected. He has a great historical lesson on that for our people about how that all worked.
Okay.
Got a minute for this. I know your time's about gone, but I spent a couple of weeks in Australia with the Aboriginal people back in 2018, and their journey toward what we're calling recognition, they call that effort reconciliation. And to them, if they could ever get Europeans who came in and overtook their country to recognize, first of all, that reconciliation is what they're about, because they're trying to get non-Indigenous Australians to recognize that they are an Indigenous people. They've been dispossessed. They have been oppressed. They have been overlooked. And for the Australian and Aboriginal people, they feel like recognition is a reconciliation of Aboriginal people and Europeans as well, where they both come to appreciate each other. And I think in America, that's what our effort is too. And it is a journey. It is a journey. It just takes time.
Okay, I will do one more question, and I apologize if I didn't get everyone's question. It says, what processes should be used to ensure expanded understand recognition of Native Americans and their contributions?
I think one issue that we kind of start off with is that we have issues in our K through 12 curriculum that does not properly share the history of American Indians. So we get that little paragraph in the history books that's usually about the Trail of Tears, and 87% of references paint American Indians in a pre-1900s context. I know, so particularly for me, my passion is revising the K through 12 curriculum and ensuring that we have accurate information going out starting in kindergarten on up, so that our students, not only our natives but non-natives, understand the true history of American Indians and what that means.
Okay.
That is so important. You know, when you hear nowadays just what you said, Dr. Leslie, I hear voices, even among our own people, saying, you're rewriting history, you're destroying history. And my response is, we're not. We're correcting it. We're just trying to correct the story.
Fair recognition will help us with that too. I mean, you'll have money there to where you can, create your own schools, own tribal schools, those types of things. So we'll be able to use those monies to get embrace or enhance our history. And then to bring more, Public Schools Robinson County are one of the highest grant recipients, Title VI Indian education in the country. But we'll be able to put more focus on that. And I don't have time, but this will help the school systems too.
Okay, and we can go over a few minutes. So I'm going to ask a couple of other questions. It says, what are the key historical contributions of Native Americans to the agriculture industry today?
Oh my goodness.
One thing is we don't lease the land. And, you know, we have such a high appreciation for the land itself. And of course, agriculture now is miles ahead of ahead of where it was when I grew up, when you actually just family by family broke the soil and threw something in the ground and just patiently waited and prayed to God to bring something out of that you'd thrown in the ground. But this massive agricultural industry now, that I think we border on literally raping our ground, because you can grow a crop now 2 or 3 times a year on some of the land around here. Just respecting it.
But our resiliency as a people comes through us, our families being farmers. Your parents, my grandparents on both sides, many Lumbee as well. They didn't have a high level of education, but they knew how to buy land. They knew how to count money. They knew how to measure land. And they knew how to bring crops out of the land to feed their families. That's why they all had big families. They didn't have to hire a workforce. The family was the workforce. But now I see young farmers coming up like Ellery Locklear Farms and several others, where they're changing from tobacco and soybeans and corn, and they're growing vegetables. And it's amazing just to see, go by there the last few days, people buying collards and turnips and all our fall crops, and they're so seasonal with it. And that helps our food insecurity, because it's not a block store like a Dollar General that's selling cookies and stuff. This is fresh vegetables that we eat, because our people came up, when we grew up, you didn't get tomatoes in the winter time. That was the summer. You went to the winter crop, and it helped our bodies, and we didn't have as much disease back 80, 100 years ago, because we ate what we grew, and we ate it in the proper season, in the proper time for our bodies to be healthy. So now our young people are realizing this, and they're bringing us back to this now. Even at the Culture Center, we have a garden out there, and our young farmers helped us with that. We fed thousands of people through COVID testing. We tested over 5,500 people doing COVID testing this summer with grants that the tribe had, and we give away fresh vegetables from 4 different Lumbee farmers. And 2 of them told us if it had not been for us buying those vegetables from them with COVID-19 funds we got from the federal government, they may not make it through this summer. So it's amazing how this farming and what we've learned over 150 years from our ancestors, what has been done with it today is amazing to me.
Yeah, and I can relate to
bring us back to where we need to be.
Yeah, and I can relate to that. Just listening to stories from my parents. My mom had a 4th grade education, and she said she could only go to school when it was raining, because she came from a family of 16, and so they had to work the farm. You know, so I can totally relate to that. My dad with a 5th grade education, but he read the Bible 3 times, so he taught himself to read because he was a minister, and the words might not have been proper, but I knew what he said. You know, so I can totally relate to that discussion. So I have one more question, and she said we could go over for a little bit. It said, how could religion be so important to you, knowing that we were not accepted into the general church as the Bible says?
Yeah, we made it for ourselves. As Melinda says, we took hold of Christianity and made it sing. And I'm telling you, Lumbee worship is unique to Lumbee people. And I've been in just a number of settings where I knew this was different. This was not us, but we grasped it and come to understand that it was about us and God, not us and those folks over there we couldn't be with. It's just us and God. And so we adopted it as our own. Forget about who doesn't want us. We adopted it as our own.
I've been to church a few times when Preacher Mike, and I've seen other preachers too, but I've seen Preacher Mike doing on several occasions where he didn't even get to give the sermon. Would fill the people, and he would just let it flow. He didn't even pick up his Bible. It was just the Spirit. And
that's what we call the Spirit took over.
And if you he's right. It's amongst the Lumbee for sure.
Yeah,
and I'd just like to add too how different it really is in other churches. We are just blessed. I think we are, because I think we have it all. We have good preaching, we have good teaching, we have singing, and it's just a total experience. And Preacher Mike is right. This is between there's never a sense that it's a white man's religion. This is absolutely between us and God.
Yeah.
However, when he was president of the Baptist Association of North Carolina, is that correct? When he was in that position, and there's been others that went with him, like Tim Chavis and some others. I don't know them all, but they made sure in those conventions that the American Indian was at the table and represented. You know, that's even the church politics, and even Preacher Mike was there making sure that the Lumbee voice in particular was heard. And that's something people don't talk about much, but that's a major thing that him and others accomplished during the last 20, 30 years.
And to appreciate the broad Indian diversity in North Carolina. Several tribes.
And there's churches right now, local churches that go out and help other tribes across America.
Yeah, that's right.
Several times a year, you know. And then when we come to full federal recognition, it's hard to get that response back. But we keep doing what's right by our indigenous people. I don't know another tribe that does more spiritually across America, helping people spiritually, other tribes than the Lumbee. I challenge anybody to tell me who that would be.
I agree. Okay, I got one more question. This is great discussion. What did the Native Americans teach Europeans in the 16th and 17th centuries?
How to survive in a land that they'd never been in, and it was hard for everybody. But naturally, Native people knew, just knew how to live in this country. And I'm sure survival, how to grow food, and game, how to hunt and fish, and just how to survive, Lord, just how to make it.
That's why it challenges the full recognition for us, because we first met the Europeans over 400 years ago. Western tribes, they met them, but they weren't in full force on them like they were on the East Coast with us. So that's been a challenge about keep holding on to your identity and your culture because of that long-term distance. But what Preacher Mike just said, so right on target, because the American Indians, when the Europeans first got here, could have just starved them out. We didn't have to have weapons. We could have just not fed them or showed them how to do any of these things, and you could have just starved them out. But American Indian people didn't choose that route. They did the human being thing, where they helped another human being, whether they were Indian or not. And I believe that in my heart, that's what they did, and they allowed them to survive. But we've got the short end of the stick.
Yeah, because we are a generous people. We are. I feel like we are generous for people. We're givers. We're givers.
Right.
So the last question I have, if you could give one final thought to our participants about Lumbee identity, culture, Lumbee ways of life, what would it be?
I'd say to these younger people, never limit your understanding of yourself to what other people say about you. Mm-hmm. Never limit it to that. You're always more than what other people say about you, particularly the limited understanding that people have about us. Don't limit your understanding to that. You build yourself into the full expression of what you're capable of. You're so gifted. You're absolutely gifted and blessed.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that the pride that I have in the Lumbee story and our history and how we're so self-determined, and as a tribe and as a community of people, and to know that those are the shoulders that you'll stand on and continue to build.
Mm-hmm.
But the Lumbee way of life is diverse, and it's complicated, and only Lumbees truly understand it. We know what it is. It's hard to explain to someone that's not Lumbee, but we try. But I think full fair recognition, to me, the number one thing I'm hoping and praying it will do is bring back, well, not bring back, but enhance dignity and respect from others. Because I grew up with low self-esteem. Many of our youth still suffer with it. At the Lumbee Tribe Boys and Girls Club, we have 600 boys and girls at a time. We try to instill and bring them out of that. And it's hard to bring them out of that because sometimes they go home and they're not getting that reinforcement they need. And I think full fair recognition, we will have a tool that will be able to us to address those issues, especially amongst our young people, about who they are and what they struggle with, and with the dignity and the respect and the cultural part of their identity. I think we'll be able to reinforce it through fair recognition.
And I would just close by saying I don't think anything exhibits the beauty of our culture quite like Lumbee Homecoming. So if you ever get the opportunity to come out to Lumbee Homecoming, it's first and second weeks in July, and it is all in Pembroke, North Carolina. So I think the opportunity every time I get to speak with someone is you can hear me talk a lot about the beauty of grape ice cream and a collard sandwich, but there's nothing like trying to Dispel.
Wow.
Okay, well, that ends our presentation, and I want to thank all of the panelists so much, Tribal Godwin, Pastor Cummings, Dr. Locklear, and Ms. Clark. I really appreciate you participating. This PowerPoint, I put it together, and I also have some resources that talks about Lumbee English Part 1 and 2, the Lumbee Powwow, and I also put the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina as a resource that you can look at. And this PowerPoint can be mailed out to all of our attendees as well too. But thank you guys so much, and happy Native American Heritage Month.
Cordelia,